Well, after seeing this, I can't wait to check out the companion film, The Southman. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about a newer theatrical release, The Northman. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it, or if you were planning on seeing it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with more movie-related content like action movie reviews on a near-daily basis. But let's not waste any more time and let's talk about The Northman. This stars Alexander Skarsgard as Amleth, a young Viking prince on his quest to avenge his father's murder. This is directed by Robert Eggers, who also co-wrote the screenplay in his third feature film after The Witch and The Lighthouse, the latter of which I really enjoyed. And it just hit theaters in late April, being based on the legend of Amleth, a Viking warrior prince from Scandinavian legend. And this sees Eggers venture for the first time into much more mainstream territory than what he's known for. While both The Witch and The Lighthouse did well enough at the box office and were also both critically acclaimed, there's definitely more of a niche feel to both films, with their heavy use of allegorical elements and or slow burn approaches. They both work for me, and as I said, The Lighthouse in particular I loved, and both films definitely have their audiences, but I know those films might not be for everyone. However, make no mistake about this is probably the most straightforward of Eggers' three films, with a pace much different than either of his first two. This is an action-packed, brutal, bloody revenge tale where at 2 hours and 17 minutes, you don't feel that runtime at all. Now, some have pointed out that this is basically something along the lines of stories we've seen before, from Hamlet to The Lion King, and yes, that might be true to a degree, but then again, most movies, even original ones, borrow some familiar elements from other films in one way or another. It's one of those things that's just bound to happen at this point. But the thing that matters the most is the execution, and in that regard, this did not disappoint. What's probably the most fascinating element about this film is its overall moral ambiguity. It's not exactly your typical good versus evil story. We're not necessarily on the hero's journey with Amleth. The way things worked at this time and in the setting, it's kill or be killed. And that means seeing these characters go through some of these heartbreaking experiences only to then be the ones on the opposite end of a similar situation. Like when we last see Amleth as a kid, he's crying as he escapes being killed himself, vowing revenge for his father. But then the first time we see him as an adult, in like the very next scene, he's with a group of Vikings and he's invading a small town, killing and pillaging with no remorse whatsoever. The look on his face remains stone cold, and he almost never gives any of it a second thought. But we see that's also what he needed to do in order to survive, especially in order to get closer to his end goal. And the film never condones when we see the script flip on characters who we believe to be sympathetic, and it's not asking us to justify their behavior, and while that might sound like a major turnoff, as how can you have a film with characters who aren't necessarily sympathetic, it's still ultimately fascinating for the way it examines the lengths to which we'll all go to when we're at that moment where we feel backed into the corner. It explores how our instincts, our ambition, and how our severe devotion to this one particular thing can blind us from any sort of reason or logic. And there's one moment at the beginning of the film that's at the crux of said exploration, in which young Amleth and his father, played by Ethan Hawke, take part in the ceremony that's meant to prepare Amleth to be king, which is overseen by the jester, played by Willem Dafoe. And in that moment, it even sees Amleth and his father on their knees barking like dogs as they take part in this ritual, which is when Amleth also takes a vow of devotion. And while it's a moment one might find odd, it essentially sets us up for what we should expect when these characters are later placed in these very tough situations. So it all circles back around nicely, and we see it even further through various monologues placed strategically throughout the film that add such emotional weight, especially in one uttered by Nicole Kidman, who plays Amleth's mom in what's easily the most chilling moment of the film. It comes up later on, so I won't spoil it, but you'll know what it is when you see it. And what I found especially commendable is the way that these themes were one of the strongest elements throughout the film, yet it also wasn't in such a way where it sacrificed its story or its characters. Like, you have films that try to convey a particular message or discuss a relatable topic, and even if you understand at times what the film's going for, I'm sure there have been times where it still ultimately doesn't work for you because, while thematically strong, it just wasn't engaging on a storytelling level. Well, that's not the case here. This is gripping from start to finish, with each character having a distinct personality that captivates you, and that's thanks to a mix of all the performances, the strong screenplay, as well as Eggers' unique visual flair. What's great is how, it's not filled to the brim with non-stop action in each and every frame. However, it still doesn't skimp out on the action. Now, I don't want to undersell it as if it goes on for long stretches without any action, but there's a balance, with the fights coming at just a frequent enough pace, and each being so visceral that they leave a lasting impression. And to boot, once things begin to amp up, the film stays at a constantly high energy level, even when we're in moments that might not be centered around a fight scene. There's a ferocity in just the way characters will simply speak to one another, having a normal conversation. Like that monologue of Nicole Kidman's I mentioned earlier that I'm not going to spoil. Not only is it great just on a story-based and emotional level, but it's just as intense as some of the fights that came before it, due to the delivery and the expressions by the actors involved in the scene, not just her. And to then get to all the performances, Alexander Skarsgard is excellent here. I've always thought he was a good actor, but I admit, I wouldn't say he was in anything where he just blew me away. But that changes with this. The intensity he brings to this role was just top-notch stuff. He can sometimes be a man of few words, and then the next he's screaming his way through each scene, and the emotion is felt equally. Like, his silent moments were just as effective as the moments where he's yelling, and it never felt jarring in the way he'd switch gears. I know he's been getting much more high-profile roles as of late, but I really hope that continues, because that's someone with a clear movie star energy who I think should be recognized for it a little more. Anya Taylor-Joy is also very effective here, as the one character who I'd say is the most moral of everyone. She plays Olga, who's held in captivity as a slave by Amleth's uncle Fjolnir, played by Claes Bang, and she acts as this voice of reason for Amleth. Like, she'll try pulling him in before he makes any rash decision, and she becomes another major motivation for him to get his revenge on Fjolnir. And because of that moral center she provides, it allows Anya Taylor-Joy to get in some solid emotional moments, so this was another great performance by her. And speaking of Claes Bang, I'm not honestly all that familiar with the guy. Going off his filmography, it said he was in the movie Lockdown, which I've seen, but I also didn't care for that movie, and already I could barely tell you anything from it because it's already out of my memory. So this is really the first time he's in something where it's left a lasting impression on me. But I thought he made for an excellent antagonist. He had such a great, sinister energy about him, and he also brought a lot of that same intensity that Skarsgård brought. And it would match nicely when the two would come face to face, especially when we get towards the riveting final act. I'll definitely be on the lookout for more from him. And then, of course, Nicole Kidman is excellent. That should go without saying. She's never given a bad performance, even if I'm not the biggest fan of the rest of the movie itself. But here, this is an example as to why she's one of the greats. Even though she's second billed, I'd argue she's not quite in the movie as much as someone with second billing should be. Like, I think Anya Taylor-Joy is in it more than she is. Could be wrong there. But it's one of those performances where we may go some stretches without seeing her, but she packs such a punch each time she shows up. I don't know what the film's Oscar chances will ultimately be, at least in terms of acting, but if there's one performance I would nominate here, it would be her hands down. And those are the four main ones that really get a lot to do. Bjork is also in the movie as a Cirrus, and she's billed as a major player on the poster, but it's honestly a very small role. It's fine, but there's not much to really say there about her. And both Ethan Hawke and Willem Dafoe are only in the film's beginning. Again, both good. It was especially fun to see Willem Dafoe play a jester, as he got some great comedic relief in there, but both of them are only in the movie so much, so again, there's really not a ton to say regarding them. I would have liked to have seen more Dafoe, though, as his energy was fantastic. But I will briefly touch upon the fact that, like The Lighthouse, there's actually a bit more dark humor in there than you'd think. It's not quite as much as The Lighthouse, and I wouldn't classify this as like a dark comedy or anything, don't get me wrong there, I don't want to overstate it. But there are a few moments that cut the tension nicely. Like, there's a moment early on after this brutal attack, and in the wind down from that moment, someone out of place just wanders onto the screen, and it feels like such a bizarre moment that it got a good laugh out of me. Also, the other thing that I have to talk about is the production values. Just top-notch stuff. For one thing, I just appreciate the fact that Eggers was handed as big of a budget as he got for this, considering it's not an IP and he's not known for making IPs, and yet he was allowed to just do what he wanted for the most part. It's great to see there's still trust being put into newer and upcoming filmmakers to have that sort of creative freedom with such a big budget, in a time where people like to falsely claim that there aren't many original movies out there, which is a statement I never really agreed with. But this looked absolutely gorgeous. Eggers' direction and the cinematography were just stunning. A lot of the wide shots were beautiful, and the way it captured so much detail within all of the landscapes was like something out of a painting. Even though it's a very dark film in terms of its material, it still felt vibrant from a visual standpoint, which I really liked. There's so much macabre imagery that heightened even some of the quote-unquote quieter moments, and with there being so much attention to detail, sometimes even just the open fields where characters had a camp laid out or have a settlement or whatever it was, it felt like the environment was a character itself, which is something Eggers was always great at, where you just feel completely immersed in this treacherous environment, whether it be the woods and the witch, or the titular lighthouse and the lighthouse. So I really commend all the attention to detail there. My only thing was that there were some supernatural elements added to the film that I don't think completely worked as well as I would have liked, usually coming in the form of visions. They're somewhat of a mixed bag for me. On one hand, all these scenes are shot gorgeously, and it sees Eggers get to do some of the more experimental stuff that we'd see like in The Lighthouse, with some of its allegorical imagery. It's just on a much more restrained level here, but it's still prominent enough that it's not like this blink and you miss it moment. It's not to the point that the film derails for 10 minutes exploring this or anything, but when we cut to these moments, they do feel a little jarring, and for much of the film, you're not entirely sure where they're going with some of that stuff, so it just feels a little off. Now, where the movie ends, it actually all comes together, so I think knowing what I know now going into a second viewing, it won't be quite as much of an issue for me, but as it currently stands, the way some of these supernatural elements play a part in this otherwise very grounded story, I think the way they're included could have just come across a little better. The Northman is a gripping, brutal epic that's once again another hit for Robert Eggers, and easily his most accessible outing to date. While it's a simple revenge tale that might seem familiar on its surface, it's still a visceral, sometimes subversive, though very stylized take on this particular sort of story, filled with a lot of intense action, stunning production values, and a slew of excellent performances. This is one of the films of the year that you won't want to miss. The Northman gets an 8.5 out of 10. So let me know, did you see The Northman, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Is this your favorite Robert Eggers movie? Is it your favorite Alexander Skarsgard movie? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.